The ocean does not keep secrets. It swallows them. 20 miles off the coast of the Outer Hebrides lies a cluster of rocks known as the Flannan Isles. They are jagged, unforgiving, and mostly silent. For centuries, sheep herders called them the Seven Hunters. They believed spirits lived in the long grass. They believed that if you stayed overnight, you might not be the same person when the sun rose. It is Boxing Day, 1900. The lighthouse tender Hesperus cuts through the chop, carrying supplies, letters from home, and a relief keeper named Joseph Moore. Captain Jim Harvey knows the routine. He has done this run a dozen times. As the ship approaches the landing, he waits for the ritual. The flag should be flying from the staff. The provision boxes should be stacked on the jetty. 3 men, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, should be standing there, waving, desperate for news from the mainland. But the rock is empty. Harvey blasts the whistle. He waits. He fires a rocket. A red star burns in the gray sky. Nothing. No movement. No birds scared into flight. Just the stone tower, staring back like a dead eye. Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, feels a knot tighten in his stomach. He knows these men. He knows Ducat is a stickler for rules. He knows Marshall is young and diligent. For the flag to be down, for the boxes to be missing, it's not just negligence. It's impossible. Moore volunteers to go ashore. He rows toward the west landing. The stairs, cut directly into the cliff face, rise up 160 feet into the mist. It is a stairway to the sky, or perhaps a stairway to a tomb. He steps onto the rock. The silence here is heavier than the wind. It presses against his ears. He begins the climb. 160 steps. And with every step, the dread grows. Because Joseph Moore realizes something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. He is entirely alone. To understand why 3 men vanished, you must understand where they were standing. The Flannan Isles are not a destination. They are a hazard. Located 20 miles west of the Isle of Lewis, they are the last outpost of the British Isles before the Atlantic stretches unbroken to North America. Sailors call them the Seven Hunters, a fitting name. They wait in the dark, low in the water, hunting for ships to tear open. The largest of these rocks is Eilean Moor, the Big Isle, but big is a relative term. It is barely 150 acres of ancient gneiss, rising 300 sheer feet out of the boiling ocean. It is a place that feels wrong. For centuries, the men of the Hebrides brought their sheep here to graze on the rich, salty grass. But they treated the ground like a church or a graveyard. The shepherds had rules, strict rules. When they stepped onto the rock, they removed their hats. They performed a turn decis unwise to ward off evil. And they never, ever spoke of the island by its name. On Eilean Moor, the world was inverted. You did not say, rabbit. You said, the short-eared one. You did not say, kill. You said, send home. To use the language of the mainland was to invite disaster. And the most important rule of all? Never spend the night. The shepherds believed the island belonged to the little people spirits, who did not welcome trespassers. They would drop their sheep off and row away as fast as their arms could carry them, leaving the animals alone in the dark. But the 20th century didn't care about spirits. It cared about commerce. It cared about shipping lanes. And so, the Northern Lighthouse Board decided to conquer the Seven Hunters. They brought dynamite. They brought iron. They brought 3 men to live where no man was meant to stay. They built a temple of science on a rock of superstition. And the locals whispered that the rock would eventually take it back. The Northern Lighthouse Board did not deal in ghosts. They dealt in granite and iron. To them, the darkness of the Flannan Isles wasn't supernatural. It was just a lack of candle power. Enter David Stevenson, a scion of the legendary Stevenson family, the same bloodline that gave us Treasure Island author Robert Louis Stevenson. But David didn't write fiction. He wrote specifications for survival. He designed a tower that could take a punch from God himself. Construction began in 1895. It was less of a building project and more of a military campaign. Every ounce of cement, every iron girder, every drop of fresh water had to be hauled up sheer cliffs while the Atlantic Ocean snapped at the workers' heels. They carved landings into the rock, east and west, to catch the supply boats, no matter which way the wind screamed. They blasted a road through the turf, and in the center of the island, they raised the tower, 75 feet tall, double brick walls filled with concrete. It was an artificial mountain designed to vibrate, to sway, but never to break. At the top sat the crown jewel, a massive optical lens floating in a bath of mercury. When lit, it threw a beam equal to 140,000 candles. It was a finger of fire that could be seen 24 miles away. On December 7th, 1899, the light was kindled. The darkness was defeated. Or so they thought. But the tower wasn't just a machine. It was a home, and it was a prison. Imagine living inside a chimney. The walls are curved, confusing the eye. The wind doesn't just blow outside. It plays the tower like a flute. The floor vibrates with every wave that hits the foundation. For the keepers, this was a vertical coffin. You worked, ate, and slept in a tight spiral. You were safe from the water, yes, but you were trapped with your own thoughts, the ticking of the clock, and the breathing of the 2 other men. It was a fortress, indestructible, impenetrable. So when the relief ship arrived a year later to find the gate locked and the light dead, the question wasn't how the storm got in. The question was, what happened to the men inside? 3 men walked onto the rock. None of them walked off. To understand the mystery, we have to look into the faces of the men who vanished. First, the principal keeper, James Ducat, 43 years old, a husband, a father of 4. Ducat was not a man of adventure. He was a man of duty. He had 22 years of service under his belt. He was the anchor. But Ducat didn't want this job. He had complained that the Flannan Isles were too lonely. He told his family that the rotation was dangerous. But the superintendent, Robert Muirhead, talked him into it. Muirhead told him he was the only man steady enough to tame the rock. It was a compliment that would become a death sentence. Second assistant, Thomas Marshall, 28 years old. Single. Marshall was the muscle, a gentle giant who had spent his youth as a seaman before joining the lighthouse service. Marshall was diligent, but he carried a weight. In a previous posting, he had been fined 5 shillings, a week's wages, for letting gear get washed away in a gale. He was terrified of making another mistake. He was a man who followed orders to the letter, terrified of the consequences if he didn't. And finally, the occasional keeper, Donald MacArthur, 40 years old. A veteran mariner and, by some accounts, an old soldier. MacArthur wasn't supposed to be there. He was a relief man, filling in for a sick colleague. On the mainland, MacArthur had a reputation. He was known as a salty sea dog. Some whispered he had a volatile temper. Others said he was just a man who didn't suffer fools. He was tough, capable, the kind of man who would look a storm in the eye and laugh, a family man, an anxious perfectionist, a hardened brawler. 3 distinct personalities locked in a stone tube, miles from civilization. They were competent, they were experienced, they were sane, which makes the final entries in their logbook absolutely impossible to explain. December 6th, 1900, the last morning. On the Isle of Lewis, the world is made of peat smoke and solid earth. It is a place of families, of crying babies, of church bells. For James Ducat, this morning begins like 100 others. He kisses his wife. He tells his children to behave. He promises he'll be back for Christmas. He doesn't know he is lying. The 3 men, Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur, gather at the pier. They carry their kit bags, heavy with wool socks, tobacco, and letters to read in the long dark. They joke with the crew. They complain about the cold. It is the casual banter of men who believe they have a future. The ropes land in the water. The engine engages and, just like that, the umbilical cord to the world is cut. The Atlantic is a liar. On this day, the ocean is calm. The sky is a bruised purple, but the wind is asleep. It lures them out. It whispers that everything is going to be fine. 20 miles is a short distance on a map. But on the water, it is a universe. As the mainland disappears, the silence of the ocean takes over. They arrive at the rock. The exchange is quick. The relief crew comes off. The fresh crew goes on. There is no ceremony, just a nod, a handshake. Keep the light burning. They watched the ship leave. They watched the only bridge back to humanity dissolve into the mist. Now there are only the 3 of them, the rock and the birds. They walk up the 160 steps. They enter the tower. They lock the door against the damp. The shift has begun, and the trap snaps shut. Out here, there is no government. There is no police force. There is only the book. The Northern Lighthouse Board regulations were not suggestions, they were commandments. The lamp shall be lit exactly at sunset. The lens shall be polished every morning. The gallery shall be swept of bird droppings. Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur lived in a world of aggressive cleanliness. They were three men in a dirty, chaotic ocean, trying to keep a glass room sterile. It was a war against entropy. The light didn't spin by magic. It spun by muscle. Every few hours, the weight had to be wound back up the central column. If you forgot, the light stopped. If the light stopped, ships died. There was no room for error. There was no room for forgetting. Every few hours, the log. You check the barometer. You check the thermometer. You check the wind. You write it down. It was a ritual of observation. It anchored them to reality. But the routine is a double-edged sword. It keeps you sane, but it also grinds you down. Imagine eating every meal with the same two faces. Imagine knowing exactly how a man chews his meat. Imagine knowing the exact rhythm of his breathing. Day becomes night. Night becomes day. The routine blurs the edges of time. You serve the machine. You feed the light. You wind the clock. It is a perfect, unbreakable cycle. Until the moment it breaks. Because you can wind the clock, but you cannot control the time. December 15. The clock is ticking. The steamer Archtor, bound for Leith, is fighting its way through the darkness. Captain Holman is on the bridge. He is tired. He is looking for a signpost. Navigating these waters at night requires faith. You trust your charts. You trust your compass. But mostly, you trust the Flannan light. It is supposed to be the North Star of the Hebrides, a rhythmic flash every 30 seconds. They are passing within line of sight. Ullman waits for the sweep of the beam. He waits for the comfort of that 140,000 candle-power finger of fire. But the horizon is dead. Holman checks his coordinates. He checks his watch. There is no mistake. The most powerful light in Scotland is out. This is the first anomaly. A lighthouse does not just go out. If a bulb fails, you replace it. If the clockwork jams, you hand crank it. If a man dies, another steps over his body to light the wick. For the light to die, everything has to have failed. When the Archtor finally docks in Oban, Captain Holman reports the outage. The Flannan light is dark, he says. It is a sentence that should have triggered an immediate emergency response. But it is nearly Christmas. The bureaucracy is slow. The message is noted, filed, and forgotten. It enters the labyrinth of administration and dies there. The warning was given, but nobody was listening. On the rock, the three men have already been gone for days, and the darkness is just beginning to settle in. Here is where the story breaks. Here is where history and reality refuse to shake hands. We know what the weather was like in December 1900. We have the records. The lighthouse at the butt of Lewis, just 20 miles away, kept a meticulous log. December 12th, light breeze. December 13th, calm seas. December 14th, visibility Good. According to the science, the middle of December was a window of peace. The Atlantic had put away its teeth. Fishermen were out in open boats. The mail ships were running on time. There was no hurricane. There was no gale. But on the rock, something else was happening. Is it possible for a storm to exist in a vacuum? Can the wind scream at hurricane force on one rock, while 20 miles away a man lights a pipe without shielding the flame? Physics says no. Weather systems are massive. They cover hundreds of miles. They don't pick fights with specific buildings. They don't target specific men. So we are left with two impossible options. Option 1. The weather records from the mainland are wrong, and an invisible tempest slipped past the entire British Meteorological Service. Or Option 2. The storm that struck the Flannan Isles didn't come from the sky, and it wasn't made of wind and rain. The timeline of a tragedy is rarely a straight line. Sometimes it stutters. December 20th was the scheduled relief day, the day Joseph Moore was supposed to rotate in. The day one of the 3 men on the rock, most likely Donald MacArthur, would come home for Christmas. But the Atlantic finally woke up. A real storm, one that was on the charts, slammed into the Hebrides. Gale force winds. Driving rain. It was suicide to take a ship out. So they waited. Joseph Moore sat in his cottage, his bag packed by the door. He watched the rain slash against the glass. He didn't know that the men he was waiting to relieve were already gone. He didn't know he was waiting to relieve ghosts. The storm raged for 6 days, through the winter solstice, through Christmas Eve, through Christmas Day. Families on the mainland set places for men who didn't show up. Gifts remained wrapped. The turkey was eaten with a side of worry. It's just the weather, they told each other. They're safe in the tower. They have food. They have coal. They took comfort in the image of the tower. They imagined Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur sitting by a warm fire, laughing about the gale, safe behind 3 feet of stone. They didn't know the fire had gone out days ago. They didn't know the clock had stopped. Finally, on Boxing Day, the sky cleared. The wind dropped. The Hesperus fired its engines. They set sail with light hearts. The delay was over. The mail was late, but it was coming. They were bringing fresh food, new stories, and the promise of home. They were racing to a crime scene that had been frozen in ice for a week. December 26th, Boxing Day. The Hesperus closes the gap. The mood on board is practical. The crew is ready to offload crates. Joseph Moore is ready to start his shift. But as the jagged outline of Eilean Moor comes into focus, the routine begins to unravel. Strike 1. The flag is down. Protocol dictates the Union Jack flies to welcome the relief ship. Today, the pole is naked. Strike 2. No. Provisions boxes on the landing. Usually, the keepers would have the empty crates stacked and ready to be swapped for full ones. The landing is bare. Captain Harvey pulls the whistle. A blast of steam. A roar of sound. He waits for the men to emerge from the tower, waving, running down the stairs. Joseph Moore watches the door. He knows the walk. He knows it takes a few minutes to get down the stairs. He counts the seconds. 10, 20, 60. Strike 3. Harvey orders a rocket fired. It screams into the air and explodes with a sharp crack. A signal that cannot be ignored. The birds scatter. The island flinches. But the tower does not answer. There is no maybe anymore. There is no sleeping in. In the lighthouse service, silence is not an error. Silence is a catastrophe. The order is given to launch the boat. Joseph Moore steps in. He's going ashore. Not to relieve his friends, but to find them. The Queen of the Night has gone dark, and the King of Terrors has taken the throne. It is a short row from the ship to the landing, but for Joseph Moore, it is the longest journey of his life. Every stroke of the oars pulls him closer to a question he doesn't want to answer. Why didn't they answer the whistle? Why didn't they answer the flare? He steps onto the concrete. The stone is cold, slippery. The smell of the place hits him. Rotting kelp, bird lime, and the metallic tang of the ocean spray. He is alone. The crew of the Hesperus stays in the boat. They are sailors, not keepers. This is Moore's domain. This is his burden. He begins the climb. 160 steps. He calls out, "James! Tom! Donald!" The wind swallows his voice. There is no echo. Just the sound of the Atlantic chewing on the rocks below. He reaches the summit. The compound lies before him. The wall. The courtyard. The tower. It looks perfectly normal. And that is what makes it terrifying. It's not a ruin. It's not a battlefield. It's just empty. It's a stage where the actors have walked off in the middle of a scene. He reaches the gate. He hesitates, because he knows that once he opens this gate, there is no going back. Whatever is on the other side becomes the truth. He pushes. The gate swings open. Joseph Moore walks into the mystery. The compound is a ghost town. The paths are swept. The walls are clean. It is a picture of order. Moore walks to the main door of the cottage. He expects it to be locked. Keepers always secure the tower when they go out. But the handle turns. It's unlocked. Boys, the silence inside is different from the silence outside. Outside, it was the silence of nature. Inside, it is the silence of absence. The kind of silence that hurts your ears. This hallway should be full of noise. Heavy boots, the smell of tobacco, the clatter of equipment. Now it is just a vacuum. He stands before the kitchen door. The heart of the home. If they are anywhere, they are in there. Maybe they're sick. Maybe they're asleep. Maybe they're just waiting. He pushes the door, and the time for maybe runs out. The room is empty. But it is not just empty. It is interrupted. Joseph Moore realizes he is the only living soul in a place built for three. The kitchen at Eileen Moore is a scene frozen in amber. It is not a crime scene. There is no blood. No signs of a struggle. It is something worse. It is a pause button pressed on existence. The fire is dead. The ashes are cold. Stone cold. This hearth hasn't seen a flame in days. In the damp chill of December, the fire is life. To let it go out means you are either dead or you have left the building in a panic. The clock on the wall has stopped. Its pendulum hangs motionless. Silence has replaced the heartbeat of the room. Without men to wind it, time itself has given up. More checks the bunks, unmade. As if the men had just woken up, but the pillows are cold. The blankets are stiff. The air is stale. It smells of old smoke and neglect. He stands in the center of the room, trying to force the pieces to fit. If they went out to work, why is the fire out? If they went out to check the light, why are the beds unmade? It looks like a room where 3 men were living their lives, right up until the second they weren't. The mundane details make it horrific. A half-read book, a pair of slippers. These are not the artifacts of a tragedy. They are the artifacts of a Tuesday. Moore backs out of the room. The normalcy is suffocating. He needs air. He needs to find something that explains this. The table tells a story of interruption. Cold meat, potatoes, pickles, a meal prepared, served, and abandoned. One chair is overturned. Why? Did someone jump up in a hurry? Did they see something through the window? Or did they hear something? Imagine the scene. The smell of hot food, the comfort of dinner. And then a sound, a crash, a scream, a whistle. Joseph Moore picks up the chair. He tries to make the room look right again. But he can't. The story is already written in the cold grease on the plates. Men don't leave a hot meal for nothing, especially not on a rock where food is the only luxury. Whatever called them away was urgent, more urgent than hunger, more urgent than protocol. It was a panic, a sudden, violent need to be elsewhere. And whatever they ran toward, it was waiting for them. The kitchen offers questions. The hallway offers a clue. But it's a clue that doesn't make sense. There should be 3 sets of oilskins hanging here. 1 for Ducat, 1 for Marshall, 1 for MacArthur. 2 sets are missing. James Ducat's gear is gone. Thomas Marshall's gear is gone. This tells us they went out together, dressed for the weather. But the 3rd set remains. Donald MacArthur's coat is still hanging on the peg. This is the detail that freezes the blood. If there was a storm, if the weather was bad enough to require oilskins, why would MacArthur, an experienced sailor, go out without his? It suggests a timeline. Ducat and Marshall go out first. Perhaps to check something. Perhaps to secure gear. They are dressed for it. MacArthur stays behind. And then something happens. Something so catastrophic, so immediate that he runs out the door in his shirt sleeves. He doesn't take 10 seconds to grab his coat. He just runs. He runs into the freezing Atlantic gale with nothing to protect him but his clothes. Why? What could make a man forget the cold? What could make a veteran keeper break the cardinal rule of survival? Only terror. Pure, blind terror. Moore returns to the landing. He brings no answers, only a contagious fear. They are gone, he tells them. The clocks are stopped. The crew of the Hesperus swarms the rock. These are practical men, sailors. They believe in accidents, in falls, in sickness. They do not believe in vanishing acts. They are determined to find the bodies. They form a line. They walk the island from end to end. It doesn't take long. Hylian Moor is not a continent. It is a claustrophobic slab of rock. You can walk across it in minutes. They check the cliffs. They lean over the precipice, shouting into the roar of the surf. James, Thomas, Donald. Only the gulls answer. They check the gullies. They check the old ruins of the chapel. They check the sheep pens. There are no bodies, no blood trails, no scraps of clothing caught on the brambles. If they fell, where are they? If they were washed away, why is there no sign of a struggle on the cliffs? They searched the east landing. Nothing. It is pristine. The ropes are coiled. The crane is secured. Then they turn their eyes to the west landing, the side of the island that faces the open Atlantic, the side where the weather hits first. As they approach the western edge, the search changes. The order disappears. Because here, the island is not pristine. Here, the island has been broken. They descend into the geo, the narrow inlet on the western side. And here, the mystery stops being about ghosts and starts being about physics. The east landing was untouched, but the west landing has been pulverized. Iron railings, cemented into the solid rock, are bent over, not just broken, twisted, warped by a force that didn't just hit them, but crushed them. Superintendent Muirhead would later catalog the damage. He found a block of stone weighing more than a ton. It had been cemented into the cliff face at 110 feet above sea level. It was gone, ripped out of the earth and thrown down onto the rocks below like a pebble. Think about that. For water to rip a 1-ton stone from a cliff 110 feet up, the wave didn't just have to splash it, it had to engulf it. We are talking about water moving with the weight of a freight train. A life buoy, stored 110 feet up, is gone. Ropes stored in a crate 70 feet up are scattered across the rocks 40 feet above where they started. The evidence is undeniable. The island was hit by a leviathan, a wall of water so high, so heavy, that it clawed the top of the cliffs. But here is the problem. The weather reports said it was calm. The view from the Isle of Lewis showed no storm. So if the ocean did this, when did it happen, and why did nobody see it? The West Landing holds the answer to how they might have died, but it doesn't explain why they were there. And it certainly doesn't explain what they wrote down before they left. Because the true horror isn't on the rocks. It's waiting back in the tower, written in slate. The bodies are gone. The gear is gone. All that is left are words. Joseph Moore opens the logbook. He expects to find the usual data: barometric pressure, temperature, wind direction. He expects the boring, rhythmic heartbeat of the lighthouse service. Instead, he finds a descent into madness. The entries begin on December 12th. Ducat writes of severe winds. He describes a storm that is hammering the island. Remember, the mainland records show calm weather. The Archdor, passing nearby, saw no storm on the 12th. Yet Ducat, a man with 20 years of experience, is writing about a gale that terrifies him. But it's not the weather report that chills Moore's blood. It's the notes about the men. Thomas Marshall crying. Thomas Marshall, the second assistant, a man described as a giant, a man who had spent his life on the sea. Why would a little wind make him cry? Why would a veteran sailor weep inside a solid stone tower? They were safe. They were warm. They had food. Lighthouse keepers do not cry because of wind. They laugh at it. Ducat, irritable, the stoic father figure, the rock of the operation. He is cracking. Something was happening in this tower. Something that stripped the professionalism right off of them. The storm wasn't just outside, it was inside. And then, the entry that changes everything. The entry that turns a maritime accident into a ghost story. December 13th. The logbook continues its impossible narrative. Storm continued through night. Thomas Marshall is still crying. Imagine that. A grown man, a professional sailor, reduced to tears for 24 hours straight. Is it fear, or is it despair? James Ducat is described as quiet, not irritable anymore. Just quiet. The silence of a man who has realized there is no way out. If you stood on the Isle of Lewis that night and looked west, you would have seen nothing but a gray horizon. No cyclone. No apocalypse. So what were they seeing? Were they hallucinating? Was it mass hysteria? Or was the storm localized entirely around this one rock? And where is Donald MacArthur, the occasional, the fighter? The logbook is silent about him on the 13th. Is he the one holding it together? Or is he the one they are afraid of? The entries describe a siege, but a siege by what? The wind can't hurt you inside a fortress. The rain can't touch you. Unless the storm isn't the problem. Unless the storm is just the delivery mechanism for something else. Something that makes seasoned mariners drop to their knees. Me, Ducat, and MacArthur prayed. This is the line that breaks the investigation. Donald MacArthur was a man of the world. A hard drinker. A brawler. He was not known for his piety. On the mainland, the idea of MacArthur on his knees praying for deliverance would be a punchline. But here, in the logbook, he is praying. All three of them are. Lighthouse keepers trust in stone. They trust in double brick walls. They trust in the optical physics of the Fresnel lens. They do not pray for the storm to stop. They wait for it to pass. To pray means that the science has failed. It means the walls don't feel thick enough anymore. It means they believe they are facing something that engineering cannot stop. What kind of storm makes a man like MacArthur pray? It suggests they weren't just afraid of dying. Sailors accept death as a workplace hazard. No, they were afraid of what was coming for them. They were praying for their souls, and then the chaos stops. December 15th, 9 a.m. The final words ever written by the keepers of Flannan Isle. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all. It reads like a benediction. A sigh of relief. The terror of the previous days has evaporated. They survived. The storm is over. God is back in his heaven. But this entry creates the final, fatal paradox. If the storm ended at 9 a.m. and the sea was calm, why did they die? They clearly survived until the afternoon. They prepared lunch. They ate part of it. They were going about their day. And yet, sometime between lunch and the lighting of the lamp at 4 p.m., something drew them out of the tower. We know they were gone by nightfall. When the archdeacon passed at midnight, the light was already cold. So they didn't die in the storm of the century that made them cry and pray. That storm had passed. They died in the calm. God is over all. It was the last thing they wrote. But looking at the empty rock, one has to wonder, which God were they talking about? When the impossible happens, we reach for science to explain it away. Superintendent Robert Muirhead, the man who hired the keepers, was tasked with finding the answer. He knew the men. He knew the rock. And he knew that the Northern Lighthouse Board would not accept ghosts as a cause of death. His conclusion was brutal and simple. He looked at the wreckage at the West Landing. He looked at the missing gear. And he built a theory. The theory. It is the afternoon of December 15th. The storm has passed, but the sea is still swelling. Ducat and Marshall go down to the West Landing to secure the equipment box where the ropes are stored. MacArthur stays behind in the kitchen. From the west, a rogue wave approaches. These are freaks of nature. Walls of water that can rise up out of a calm sea without warning. Ducat and Marshall see it coming. But they are trapped. The water rises 110 feet in seconds. MacArthur, watching from the tower, sees the wave. He sees his colleagues disappear into the white foam. In a moment of pure adrenaline, he abandons protocol. He runs out in his shirt sleeves. He races down the stairs to save them. And then the second wave hits. The sea swallows all three. No witnesses, no bodies, just the math of water displacement. It is a plausible theory. It fits the missing gear. It fits the damage at the landing. But it has holes. Why would experienced keepers go down to the most dangerous part of the island when the tide was rising? Why was the gate closed behind them? And why, if the logbook says God is over all and the storm is over, would the sea still be violent enough to kill them? Physics explains the how. It struggles with the why. But what if the ocean was innocent? What if the storm inside the tower was the one that killed them? Cabin fever is real. In the 19th century, lighthouse keepers were known to go mad. The isolation acts like a pressure cooker. It magnifies every annoyance, every tick of the clock, every chew of food. Donald MacArthur, was a man with a reputation, a brawler, a man who didn't like authority. Ducat was a strict disciplinarian. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The logbook entries paint a picture of a group falling apart. Ducat irritable, Marshall crying. Was this fear of the weather, or was it fear of MacArthur? The theory, December 15th. Tensions boil over. An argument starts at the dinner table. Maybe about the logbook. Maybe about a chore. The chair is overturned. A fight breaks out. MacArthur, the occasional keeper, finally snaps under the weight of the rock. They rush outside. Maybe Ducat and Marshall flee. Maybe MacArthur chases them. On the edge of the West Landing, a struggle ensues. In the chaos, they fall. Or perhaps they are pushed. And the survivor, realizing the horror of what has happened, realizing he can never explain this, throws himself into the sea to join them. It explains the overturned chair. It explains the missing gear, if they ran out in a panic. It explains the lack of log entries after noon. But those who knew them refused to believe it. They were brothers, Moore said. They were steady men. But everyone is a steady man. Until the moment they aren't. And then there's the theory that is whispered in the pubs of the Hebrides. The theory that you won't find in Superintendent Muirhead's official report. The locals warned them. They said Elian Moor was not a place for men. They said it belonged to the little people. They said that if you dug into the earth there, you would bleed. The theory, the keepers trespassed. They brought iron and noise to a place of silence, and the island rejected them. There is a legend of the Phantom of the Seven Hunters, a spirit that takes the form of a great bird. Some say the keepers saw it. Some say they heard it calling their names in the wind. Look at the logbook again. Men praying, not working, not fighting. Praying. You pray when you are in the presence of something other. Imagine the scene. It is quiet. The storm has passed. Then, a sound. Not a wave. Not a wind. A voice. The call of the isle. It is said to be a siren song that pulls men toward the edge. It overrides fear. It overrides logic. It tells you that the water is warm, that the water is home. They leave their food. They leave their coats. They walk out into the cold air, not because they are panicked, but because they are summoned. They walk to the edge of the world, and they step off. When the relief crew arrived, the only living things on the island were the birds, and the locals will tell you. Those birds seemed bigger than usual. They seemed to be watching. Did 3 men disappear, or were they simply collected? On December 26, 1900, Captain Harvey of the Hesperus sent a telegram to the Northern Lighthouse Board. It was short. It was final. A dreadful accident has happened at the Flannans. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur, have disappeared from the island. Poor fellows. They must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure the crane. The investigation concluded it was a rogue wave, a tragic accident of nature. The case was closed. But for the men who came after, the case was never closed. Joseph Moore took over the watch. He sat in the same chair. He wound the same clock. He listened to the same wind. He claimed until his dying day that the atmosphere in the tower was oppressive. Other keepers reported hearing voices on the wind. Some said they heard the names of the lost men being called out by the gulls. The mystery of the Flannan Isles has become a modern myth. It has inspired poems, operas, and movies. It endures because it touches a primal fear. The fear of the vanish. The idea that you can be competent, you can be prepared, you can be surrounded by stone and iron, and the world can still just swallow you whole. God is over all. Perhaps that was the truth. Or perhaps, on that remote rock at the edge of the world, God turned his back for just a moment. The light still burns. The rock still stands, but if you listen closely to the wind on Alien Ball, you might realize that the silence isn't empty. It's waiting. The mystery of the Flannan Isles is often told as a ghost story. But for 3 women in Briascleet, it was a life sentence. Margaret Ducat, the wife of James. She was left with 4 children and a silence that would never be broken. There was no funeral. There were no bodies to bury. Just a void where a father used to be. The Northern Lighthouse Board was efficient. They paid the widows a pension. They offered condolences, but they could not offer an explanation. For the families, the rogue wave theory was a cold comfort. It meant their husbands were gone in an instant. But the rumors, the talk of fights, of madness, of sea monsters tortured them. In the small communities of the Hebrides, whispers are louder than gales. The widows had to walk through town knowing that neighbors were debating whether their husbands were victims or murderers. They grew up as the children of the vanished. They carried the weight of the mystery in their surnames. A stone was eventually erected. A cenotaph. An empty tomb. A place to weep for men who were never found. The ocean took the men, but the mystery took the families. For 70 years, men continued to live on the rock. They came, they saw the dark, and they left. But the island never felt right again. On September 28th, 1971, the Northern Lighthouse Board finally conceded defeat. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse was automated. The keepers were removed. The kitchen was closed. The beds were stripped. The machines took over. Now, the light turns itself on. It turns itself off. It needs no human hand. The island is finally what it always wanted to be, alone. Today, boats pass by. Tourists snap photos of the Mystery Isle. They shiver at the story, enjoying the thrill of the unknown. But the technicians who fly in for maintenance, they don't laugh. They do their work quickly. They check the batteries. They check the bulb. And they get off the rock before sunset. Because they know the truth. You can automate the light. You can modernize the gear. but you cannot evict the ghosts. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, Donald MacArthur. They are still the keepers, and they are still waiting for the relief boat that never comes.